George Washington was a superstar for his day. At the end of the American Revolution, he did the unthinkable. He gave up power. And not once, but twice. He first resigned as the head of the only effective fighting force on the North American continent, turning over the keys of the Continental Army to the Continental Congress. He went on to help author the Constitution, establishing our current form of government with its checks and its balances, and then was persuaded to run for president. He won handily and then easily was reelected and could have gone on to become a king or at least a president for life, but instead, he turned over power for a second time. And on his way out the door, he delivered one of the most poignant and powerful speeches in American history, the farewell address. In it, he expressed concern for the new republic, fearing it might collapse under the weight of partisanship. You see, he knew the European cure for partisanship was a king, which for him was a cure that was worse than the disease. So he warned his fellow citizens of that danger. He urged them to persevere and to preserve the checks and balances of political power. How did he know so much about our national politics today? Well, maybe it was built in. This address, along with Lincoln's second inaugural address, is often referred to by historians as American scripture. Washington was a religious man, but he also understood how religion could be manipulated. In Article 6 of the Constitution, the remarkable document he helped to write, it said no religious test shall be required as qualification for office. And later, the First Amendment for that document further defined this unique ideal, saying that Congress was forbidden from establishing a state church or using taxes to fund a religious institution or inhibiting the free exercise of religion, the right of assembly, or freedom of speech. You see, for Americans, political freedom and religious freedom came at the same time. Before this, it had always been assumed that the throne and the altar had to be working together. This was what European monarchs believed. This is what the communists of Russia believed. This is what the National Socialists in Germany believed. This is not what Americans believe. No nation in history has ever been launched without the full support and collaboration of some kind of religion until us. We're unique. Washington knew the risks involved in extending and preserving freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, and freedom of religion. He knew it meant that people could worship God wherever and however they wanted to, or not. That religious institutions were free to sink or swim on their own merit. That citizens were free to disagree with their government, to criticize it, even to demonstrate against it, and that the result would be a system that was confusing and exasperating and noisy, but friends, the noise you hear has a name: democracy. That is the American story. Now, the Bible also has a story to tell about the contentious arrangement between religion and politics. The prophets of ancient Israel were a pain in the neck to the kings. They were not easy to get along with. They complained about how things were. They criticized the establishment. They embarrassed kings by standing outside the gates of the palace and pounding on the door and demanding justice for the poor. They were a nuisance and an embarrassment, constantly invoking God to support their positions and frequently ending up in jail. When Jeremiah walked up to the gates of the temple and said, "Hear the word of the Lord. Change your ways. Stop oppressing widows and orphans. Stop shedding innocent blood." Well, the kind of thing that kings and priests were yearning to hear. And today, in places like Iran and Cuba and China and Venezuela, that kind of talk will get you jailed, probably get you killed, just like it did the prophets. When the day of Pentecost had passed, the apostles were hustled before the Jewish and Roman authorities in Jerusalem because they were preaching about Jesus. Peter and John in particular were arrested for preaching in public and rousing the rabble, so they were flogged and ordered to shut up. They responded by showing up the very next day in the very same place, preaching the very same thing. So arrested a second time, for a second time they were told to shut up or else, to which Peter replied with one of the more profoundly revolutionary sayings in the Bible: "We would love to accommodate you, but we must obey God rather than men." And this is why tyrants, from Nero to Charlemagne, from Stalin to Hitler, from the KKK to the Taliban, cannot abide freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, or freedom of religion. This is why, on the 4th of July, people of faith consider and talk about and thank God for those specific rights, because freedom is a fragile thing. And well-meaning people put this hard-fought freedom to risk when they insist that we are a Christian nation, that our religion should be privileged over others. We better remember on this weekend that the founders could have easily created a Christian republic if they wanted to, but they didn't. And in fact, they chose not to. Instead, they created this atmosphere of liberty, where people were free to believe or not, to support their church or not. And to everyone's surprise, it was in that rare atmosphere that religion thrived. The unique thing about this country is that it's held together by a commitment to an ideal. We are the United States not because we're from the same race or because we inhabit the same geography. We don't talk about the fatherland or Mother America. No, we are bound together by an ideal put to paper by Thomas Jefferson 245 years ago when he wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." We are defined by the ideal that liberty is the inalienable right of every child of God. That's what holds us together, the covenant we make to bear that ideal to the others. It's something like love, which is what true patriotism is, a clear-eyed, sacrificial love for your country and its ideals. The kind of love Colin Powell once talked about when he remembered his parents coming to Ellis Island in 1923 from Jamaica and being greeted by, and I'm quoting, "an America with a big, charitable, open heart that reached out to people in need around the world." This big-hearted love that lays its life down for the nation and its ideals, this defines patriotism, not devotion to a flag or a political party or a person. And with similar love, George Washington's closing thoughts to his fellow citizens anticipated the benign influence of good laws under a free government. And when he left public service to finally retire to his beloved Mount Vernon, the last words he ever spoke to the public were these: "I leave with a fervent love for this country and its citizens, hoping for their continued kindness to an old and affectionate friend." Happy 4th of July.